Some reaction today from outside the United States Supreme Court. The High Court, in a 5-4 decision, struck down President Donald Trump's executive order limiting birthright citizenship. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Elena Kagan, and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in striking down the president's executive order. The president's now rejected executive order declared that children born to people who are in the United States illegally or temporarily are not American citizens. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority decision, quote, "Children born in the United States to parents unlawfully or temporarily present are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause," end quote. Now, after the Supreme Court dealt the president that blow, he went to his favorite social media platform with another solution. He wrote, quote, "The Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship, which is too bad for our country, but we can easily make it up in Congress through legislation with the support of the president that has now been determined during the process. No long and unwieldy constitutional amendment is necessary," end quote. Professor Emeritus at Harvard University, Alan Dershowitz, joins me. Nice to see you, sir. And you probably said 15 times, 15 and 0 on this show, that the Supreme Court would do exactly as it has done. So that one you got a perfect record on. Now, tell me, though, is there some authority in Congress? Can they write something that undermines this clause of the Constitution?
Yeah, I thought I would never say this, but today President Trump proved to be a better constitutional lawyer than Chief Justice John Roberts. Roberts started his decision by misleading the readers. Here's what he says in the beginning of his decision. The issue in this case is whether the Constitution guarantees citizenship to children born of parents unlawfully or temporarily present in the United States. That's not what was presented by this case. What was presented by this case is whether the president, by executive order, as distinguished from legislation, can decide who is and who isn't subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And so what they said and what has been interpreted to suggest Congress can't do anything is pure dictum, because the only issue presented was whether a presidential executive order can do that. And of course, the answer to that is probably no. But if Congress holds hearings and determines there's a real problem of abuse of Chinese families coming into the country in order to have babies, other kinds of problems, and they narrowly say that a person born in the country who has no allegiance, who just leaves the day after, 2 days after they're born, never again comes to the country, is not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, that's a proper congressional action. And that defines what the 14th Amendment means when it says subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So President Trump is 100% right. He can effectively overrule that decision without amending the Constitution simply by an act of Congress.
Well, if he intends to do that, he better move fast, because he's likely, there's a high likelihood he's going to lose the House and or the Senate, maybe, I don't know, in November. They'll get sworn in January. So he's going to have to move fast if he expects Congress to do that.
Well, he's already said he's going to do that. I don't know whether he said it after hearing me say what I've said in a number of contexts, but I have certainly advised the president, if he calls me, I'll continue to advise him, that he ought to seek immediate legislation defining by Congress who is subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That's not something a president can do. That's not something the Supreme Court can do. That's something only Congress can do. And so I think if he does that, the Supreme Court may well uphold legislation. He may be able to get 1 or 2 or 3 of the 5 justices to support congressional legislation, narrowing the definition of who is subject to the jurisdiction.
All right, turn to another case the Supreme Court decided today. That political parties don't have a limit on how much they can contribute to candidates. Money is obviously a First Amendment free speech. We've seen a lot of cases, but there's a lot of, there's a good argument to say that it has poisoned our system in many ways.
There's no ways. I call this the George Soros decision because it gives Soros 1 million votes to the rest of us getting just 1 vote. I agree with the Supreme Court that money is free speech, but corporate money is not necessarily free speech. Corporations aren't people. And the First Amendment gives the right to people, to citizens to speak. Does it give the right to corporations to speak through enormous grants of money? I think the Supreme Court in the initial case, Citizens United, failed to distinguish between individuals and corporations. I think they were right as it applies to individuals. They can spend money, although I do think that reasonable limits on expenditures, which is true in almost every country in the world today that have elections, could be sustained under the First Amendment.
Well, under that, it was basically a mud fight between George Soros on one side of the political aisle and Elon Musk on the other, and the rest of us with our one vote and not as much money will just be watching.
Yeah, except the difference is George Soros is a single issue person. He's a radical. He's a socialist. He's hard left. Elon Musk, you can't predict where he's going to come out on any given issue. He has much more money than Soros, but he doesn't focus his giving in the same way that Soros does, because Soros is a real ideologue. He's behind a lot of these victories of these democratic socialists in places like New York, and now we're seeing Michigan, and now even in Colorado there's a candidate. So I think it's George Soros's Democratic Party at this point, and that's a real problem for all Americans.
All right, what's the historic significance? And bring me back, give me a little history lesson. The Supreme Court now is on recess until the first Monday in October. Why do you think it's such a long recess? What was the point of that?
There was no point to it. The justices determine their own calendar. They say that Congress can't make them do anything. Of course, they can have a continuous, or every other court in the country continues. The Second Circuit, the D.C. Circuit, they don't end on July 1st. They continue to render decisions on a slower basis over the summer. The Supreme Court has decided, no, they're going to end the term on, usually it's July 1st. Today is the day before that. And that's their decision, and nobody can really second guess that. And they'll be handing emergency decisions out during the summer, individual justices. And if you get a real emergency, maybe the court will convene by video conference. So, but we're not going to see any major decisions until late fall, probably after the election. And
of course, they have a lifetime appointment as required by the Constitution.
They have an appointment during
good
behavior, right? I disagree with
Well, okay, good behavior.
Good behavior.
Good behavior. But what's bad behavior in the Supreme Court?
I can tell you, if anybody did what that judge down south did, and there were
that's bad behavior.
And there were rumors that Justice Douglas, when he was in his prime, may have done some actions, at least some people thought he did, actions akin to that. And they tried to impeach him. Actually, Gerald Ford, when he was in the House, tried to impeach Justice Douglas for bad behavior, but it failed.
Alan Dershowitz, thank you, sir.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.